Am I late to the bad hypotheticals? No, you're at just the right time. We're about to get into it. So here's what happened. Paraglobalism makes this tweet. Watching a lot of mutuals having really bad takes on this. Actually, no. I'm doubling down. If you have no reason to believe that a burglar threatens your life, you're a piece of shit for killing him. Okay. Now, I wonder, I'm first going to ask, do we have any comments on this? Any opinions on this? If you have no reason to believe a burglar threatens your life, you're a piece of shit for killing them. Because my problem is, my theory is, you have to think about how people read this, not how it's written. And that'll be an increasing problem through all the comments that we read underneath this thread, including responses to Dario's hypothetical, which we'll get into in a second here. So if you have no reason to believe that a burglar threatens your life, this is a problem. So no reason to believe could be interpreted as you do not believe that a burglar threatens your life. So for instance, you might look at them and they might look like they're drunk, they're very shittily moving about, they barely even notice that you're there. You know, maybe they're handicapped in some way that makes you not afraid of them. So you've already clocked them and you say, this person doesn't pose any threat to me or something like that. You know, so that could be number one. It could be that, you know, they're in a wheelchair and you're up a flight of stairs and you're like, I'm probably okay right here. So that's interpretation number one, that you've clocked this situation and that you know that the burglar poses no threat to you. Now, number two, and I feel like it's more close to the wording here, no reason to believe that a burglar threatens your life. So you go into your house, you see a burglar rifling around through things, but you don't see a weapon. They seem scared when they see you. You don't have an immediate reason beyond the burglary itself or the breaking and entering itself to believe that they are threatening your life. But this is rife with problems, as we'll see. Because for a lot of people, the very act of breaking, entering, and burglarizing means that that is reason enough to believe that they could pose a threat to your life. There are some people who believe that your personal possessions are an extension of yourself, and by threatening your personal effects, they are, by extension, threatening you. There's lots and lots of problems with the second interpretation, and unfortunately, I think most people will take the second interpretation, and they won't take the first one. So we kind of have to operate off of the second one, since it's most of what we're seeing in the replies to this. And I think that if you have these opinions on this topic, that burglars do not in and of themselves pose a threat to your life, you need to, I would encourage you to think practically. Think about a person in this situation, scared, no law enforcement training, maybe no like home safety training. They don't have ways of calming themselves down. They have, in a lot of these scenarios, access to a firearm is what we talk about a lot, right? Because that is the instance where you could immediately pose a lethal threat to the burglar. So that's often what I'm picturing in my mind. And you're a person in this situation, no training, no emotional control, and you have access to something that is meant to defend yourself. It is the great equalizer, and it is the ender of this situation. It can guarantee that that person will not pose a threat to you or your family or anything else, because it is a way to neutralize that threat. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that person to do a threat assessment about the burglar. That's my personal belief. It is my personal belief that, you know, if somebody is breaking into your house, besides identifying the intruder, I don't have a lot of things that I think that the person ought to do. I don't believe, like the Canadian law does, about that you should retreat necessarily. I don't know about any of that stuff. I'm very iffy on a lot of that. So that's just my personal take. I think beyond identifying who the intruder is, which solves a lot of the problems that we'll see later on about, hey, if you make a culture about shooting burglars that enter your home or intruders in your home, you're going to result in killing some people that, you know, you didn't mean to kill. Like if we zoom out and we multiply this by all the scenarios that it happens, a culture of always shooting the burglar will lead to some people who are unwelcomed intruders, but who are not a threat to your life or are not people that you would want to kill. It may lead to killing them. Like, what if grandma breaks into the house late at night? What if your girlfriend or your daughter's boyfriend breaks into the house? He's sneaking out. What if your drug addicted son comes home at an inopportune moment and broke into the house to have a place to sleep? What if? There are a lot of scenarios where family members or trusted friends could be unexpected intruders into your home, and you certainly wouldn't want to shoot and kill them. So that's why, to cover for those, I think it's reasonable to ask people to try and identify the intruder. But if you're put in a situation where that person doesn't identify themselves when asked, or you have the jump on them and it looks like they have a gun and you can't be sure, you can't see what's in their hands, it's dark, that's a tough call. Do you lose all, you know, means of secrecy or the element of surprise by asking in the dark who they are, and then they have a gun and they turn and they weren't the person that you thought that they might be, and then they attack you because now you've lost that element of surprise? I don't know. But I think the most that I would ask of people is to try and identify who the individual is that's breaking into their house. And that's about it for my initial thoughts on this. However, opinions are things that I think you should carry in a basket in front of you, and you should pick them out and put them down and replace them as new information comes about. I'm not married to these ideas. I don't have some principled position about this. I'm open to changing my mind over the course of this conversation even. So I am going to take it to the chat before we look at Dario's hypothetical here, and I'm going to see a little bit about what you guys think. What a moronic take. If they are a burglar stealing from you, they have given you every reason to kill them. I have no idea what that person will do next. Yeah, you definitely don't have any idea what the person will do next. However, to the people on this side of the argument, I'm going to encourage you to soften a bit, because I think you could soften a bit. So hear me out for 2 seconds. And if you don't want to change your mind, just let me know. I'm not interested in changing my mind, but this might be appealing to you. I don't think that they have given you every reason to kill them by breaking into your home or by stealing things. Because I think that in a lot of situations where a gun is shown, where gunfire is shot against somebody, in a lot of the videos that I've seen of this, in a lot of the stories I've read about this, the person flees. Unless they have a means to fight back, a lot of the time they flee. And they don't flee with the shit, they flee, right? And so if it is possible to scare them off and they don't intend to fight back, there isn't a reason to kill them. So for instance, if that person, if you take one shot, it misses, and they go and they jump out of a window, I don't think that it makes sense for you to go chasing after them, trying to kill them, because the initial burglarizing, it gave you some reason to believe that they want to threaten your life, and that threat to life doesn't go away just because they've stopped the act of burglary. Like, I don't think every person burglarizing your home is a threat to your life necessarily. You don't have an idea what the person will do next, and in that way, you can't assess whether or not they're a risk to your life. But just because you're not able to assess that does not mean that inherently that person is a risk to your life. And I think that that's the kind of gray area that we need to keep in mind. So I don't expect you to be able to assess it. And I don't expect you to operate in good faith and not shoot them. I don't. That's not what I'm advocating for. But what I will say is, let's keep mentally flexible about the fact that they don't pose a threat to your life simply by being there or simply by breaking into the house or stealing your shit. That's not really the way that that works. The problem here is that you can't assess it, so you have to err on the side of caution. But that doesn't mean that from an objective sense, the breaking, the burglaring is a threat to your life. So, and the reason why I have to do all this is because the debate bro people and the philosophers will be very nuts and bolts about this, and they will hammer you on that point, and we might see that in this thread. So that's something to be prepared for. The reason is lack of knowledge about what they do next. They already broke a dozen rules about personal space and respect. Sure, but I think that there is a big gap between the rules about personal space, respect, theft, breaking and entering, trespass, and threatening your life. These are two very different things. You come at me with a big iron pole, you have done a much bigger thing that I think is much more wrong, that is a much more important societal rule than breaking and entering or breaking into my car and stealing something. Both bad, definitely, both at the higher level of bad, in my opinion, but they're not comparable in that way. They're at different levels, and I want to keep them at different levels because I think they pose different threats to people. So that's what I would say. So for instance, and this is a crazy scenario, and we're going to talk about crazy hypotheticals. The reason I'm posing this crazy hypothetical is to demonstrate a situation where we kind of see this distinction. So if you're on a farm territory, whatever, you got a big piece of land, you're in the second story of your house and you have a hunting rifle and you see somebody maybe like 50 yards out and they are breaking into your truck and stealing something. If you point that gun at them and you tell them to get the fuck out of there or I'll shoot, that I think is what you should do. And you should give that person the opportunity to scamper off. They don't pose an immediate threat to you breaking into your car, but the breaking and entering just because they're down there. Same if they broke into a shed or something like that. And you have the upper hand with the weapon, and you have the element of surprise. And I think a lot of people who are opportunistic, that are trying to steal, that is enough to scare the fuck out of them and they will go away. And I don't think they pose a threat to your life simply by breaking, entering, or violating these societal rules, because there's a big difference in societal rules of going and threatening your life, like that person saying, fuck it, these people saw me break in, I'm going to go kill them because I'm a thief. Like, I don't think that's the way that really works, right? That these are very different rules, very different mindsets. The mindset of a person trying to steal does not always overlap with the mindset of a person who's willing to kill you. In a mugging, for sure, that is a very different situation, right? If I mug you and I threaten you with a gun, now we have the uncomfortable overlap of these two things. But in a home burglary situation, you're kind of a bit more separate. And in just a general theft situation, you're very, very separate. So I just want to keep in mind there are levels to this of separation between these two breaking of societal norms or whatever. Is there any level of value that you think someone attempting to steal something is drawing the line? Like if they were stealing something really special from your car in that scenario? Okay, this is not something I've thought through very well, and I will preface it with this. However, I think if I call out to you to stop and you do not stop, I would feel justified in shooting you. If you are in my garage and you are attempting to get my motorcycle started and you are stealing my motorcycle and I'm standing in the garage doorway and I point a 12 gauge at you and I say, get the fuck off that bike, and you look up at me and you continue trying to fidget with the bike, I feel justified in shooting you. I don't think that you're threatening my life, but you're threatening to continue to steal my property. And for that reason, I feel like I would shoot you. If the garage is closed, less so, much less so. Now I'm just looking for if that person is going to threaten my life. But if we're out on the street and you're breaking into my car and you're in the passenger seat, you're fucking around with something underneath my dash, and I say, get out of my car, and you look at me and you keep going with it and you're like fidgeting real hard, or I hear the motor starting, I feel justified in shooting you at that point, because I'm not going to risk you fucking stealing my car and having to wait for the cops to find the car, if at all this shit. I'm going to shoot you. That's just me personally. I don't know if that's morally justified or whatever. I'm not pretending they're threatening my life, but if you're stealing my vehicles, thousands of dollars, the most expensive things that I own that represent hours and hours and hours of my hard work, the destiny argument, I feel justified in shooting you. And I don't care to have a big philosophical debate about it. I'm not sure I would change my mind on that, but that's where I'm at with it. I'm not letting you run off with my motorcycle or my car. And so that's the thing. If Same with my laptop. Honest to God, my $3,000 laptop, if you were stealing my backpack and I said, drop it, and you try running off holding the bag, I'm going to shoot you 110% of the time. And I don't have some deep moral justification or whatever for it. In my mind, I don't think it's super possible that I'm going to get that item back. It's worth a lot of money and non-economic value to me. I'm going to shoot you because I don't think I would reasonably be able to recover all that. So that's what I think. But again, I haven't thought this through. It's not some big moral thing. With the car, if it's a standard car, nothing special and insured, is death still worth it? I'm not measuring death. I'm measuring stopping them from stealing. I don't, like, they could die from me shooting them, but I would expect them to just stop doing what they're doing. I only care about them stopping what they're doing. If it means they die to stop, then it means that they die to stop. But if I shoot and I hit them and then they get out of the car, I'm not going to keep shooting them while they're on the ground, really. But I know the advice is to keep going until they're neutralized or whatever. I don't know if I would have the heart to keep doing that, but like, I need them to stop stealing the thing, and the gun, besides my words, is the only tool that I have to stop that. Moving back into the thread, let's check out a good example of a hyperbolic situation that were provided. Now, notice how when I provided you the hyperbolic situation, what I went ahead and did is prefaced it a lot, which you can't do on Twitter, which is why on Twitter I would generally discourage the use of these kinds of hypotheticals. This is 100% true though. 7. Like if a burglar comes into your house and you are out visiting a friend, nobody is home, just empty house, you have a camera set up and you have a button you can press, which makes a hidden gun shoot them in the head. So when you say something like this, I understand it's meant to be a hypothetical in the fringes that is meant to highlight kind of the essence of what you want to talk about or what you want to point people to. However, number one, I would encourage you, especially when you're known as Dario is, for having problems with hypotheticals, to really, really try to set up a hypothetical that is realistic. I think if you compare this hypothetical to my hypothetical of you're on a farm, you're on the second story, you have your hunting rifle, and 50 yards out, somebody is breaking into your truck in the driveway. This is a much easier to wrap your head around, much more realistic scenario that kind of puts you in a similar position. But this idea of you have a camera set up and a remote button that can shoot a hidden gun to their head, so many people are going to check out just because of the hypothetical, particularly the people who you're calling immoral for pressing it. They're not going to engage with it. They may not even finish reading it. They're going to just be upset that it's ridiculous. And you're not really going to be able to communicate with people if this is how you're talking to them. So responses to Dario include, and let me go ahead and open my notes here so I have all the things I want to talk about. So, here, Dario, that's a ridiculous, contrived scenario that's obviously an attempt to stow man an indefensible take by Alia. So if you had a problem with this initial thing and you thought it was silly, or you thought this person doesn't know about getting robbed or any of these other problems, and then you double down into it with a really crazy hypothetical, it feels to some people like you're just trying to make, you're putting lipstick on a pig, that there was an awful take here that didn't make sense or didn't consider practical limitations or yada, yada, yada. It's wrong for a bunch of reasons. And then you're trying to contrive a very specific scenario in which it's right, which I don't know if that's Dario's intentions. I would like to think it's not, but that is what's going to happen when you use this kind of like extraneous, really uber specific, not realistic hypothetical, and that's part of why they're not good. And then another response to this, I think it's okay to use lethal force to stop a burglar from stealing you. Kind of dumb, obviously. I don't think that's the honest scenario presented here, friend. So even though technically what Dario is saying here fits in with this, you have no reason to believe that a burglar threatens your life. and you kill them, then you're a piece of shit. That is what's set up here. You have no reason to believe this burglar is threatening your life, but you chose to kill them, even though that is what is being mentioned there. If this doesn't seem like an honest to God real scenario, you're not going to get good responses from people. And you're going to have this, which I think is worded very nicely, but you're going to get a response like this here. And then some people will try and go, well, but you know, this technically is, and booby trapping is illegal and blah, blah, blah. But they're going to get the 3 likes. This person's going to get the 50 likes, and people are going to understand where they're coming from. So just, if you only care about having technical victories all of the time, you're a philosophy nerd, whatever, you're a debate bro, I guess you could continue to use this. I just don't think it's good for communicating with people. And to the average person in my audience, you might have arguments with your friends, you might get into debates with acquaintances. I would advise you not to make a habit of doing things like this, because it makes it very difficult to communicate with you. And this channel, a lot of it used to be about giving you practical advice for communication. My practical advice to you is to not do this. I am not saying what you're doing is what this person is saying, that it's not the scenario presented or whatever. But what I will say is that's how people will interpret it. That's predictable, and you should stop. If you have a habit of using these crazy hypotheticals, like a lot of people I've met on Discord do, stop, because it's not helping you. It's not making you a better debater. It's not making people more apt to listen to you or whatever. It's just hurting you. So I would stop doing it. And it's only fun for you, basically, and for a select few people willing to engage with it, of which, again, there are few. Anyone who breaks into your house is implicitly consenting to being shot. So one thing that these kinds of hypotheticals will do is it's a lot like if you've ever seen a video where farmers will go out to the field and they'll till the field, and a bunch of rats or mice come out that are burrowed in the field. And then you have these terriers, because this is the initial purpose of a lot of terrier dogs, that are biting and shaking and killing the rats or the mice as they're coming up out of the field. So this works as a plow to till the earth and get a lot of these mice to jump out. And if you then want to attack those mice, this functions the same way a Destiny tweet would, right? It can get people to feel like they're so in the right that they're going to go above and beyond the Call of Duty in the wording in their position, and then they give you fodder for making fun of them or for arguing against them. And if that's your purpose with something like this, then you could continue with it. But for the greater good, I would advise that we don't do that. We move away from doing that culturally. But here is one person, you know, with a much hotter take than I think everybody would have. Running this in my head, I come with the question: can something separate from a person be included in the moral equation? This is something that somebody brought up in my chat earlier. I want to say yes, but if I do, then question of can some people so they write this completely awfully. But if I do, then the question, because we need a comma there. If I do, then the question of can someone consider oh my God, I give up with this. Yeah, so it basically, if you consider your public or your personal property an extension of you, then it would get moral consideration similar to you, and then it wouldn't be a problem. So if my property in this situation that we describe up here is an extension of me, and I have this camera set up and I can shoot the person, they are threatening me by threatening my worldly possessions. So if you consider your worldly possessions a part of you, then it might be okay, and it breaks this entire thing. If that's the only way to stop them from taking your stuff, I'm fine if someone presses it. So again, we have these, mice coming out of the ground. Why are people allowed to just take whatever they want from me? What if I put a warning sign up? There's a little bit of room between you should kill them and they're allowed to. Yeah, again, we have these mice. It's illegal to have man traps even on your own property. Yeah, why was the legality brought into the so here's another problem: is if you come up with a contrived scenario and it's wrong for other reasons, like it's wrong to have booby traps. There is a huge difference between having booby traps set up in your home or like remote killing devices and standing there in your house with a gun and there's a burglar in your house. So by creating this contrived scenario that still kind of connects to the main topic, we have lost sight of context that's necessary. And because we've then created this man trap, now some people are going to be debating about a man trap, which is not something that we wanted to debate about in the first place. So there are distractions that come about by having hypotheticals like this, because depending on how specific your hypothetical is, other problems come into place, right? Like if you have a rape cage analogy, perhaps somebody is distracted by the cage and by locking somebody in, and then you have to have a whole separate conversation about why they're locked in the cage, and you have to diffuse that before you actually get to the raping part. So, you know, like, and they might be focused on the rape part and not on the larger question, which, if I remember correctly, is about if everybody else is doing it, or if it's a societal norm, do you continue to do it, or something like that, right? When you have a contrived scenario, people can have a problem with if it's a machine with cogs, cog A, cog B, cog C, they could be like, well, I don't like cog A, and I don't like cog B, and I don't like cog C. And they're not looking at the overall function of the machine because it's contrived. So that's, again, another reason why these hypotheticals are bad to propose. Me controlling my fully auto assault drone while the burglar at my house tries to fight my Chihuahua raps, and then you're going to get people making jokes about it because your scenario itself is silly. So if you're meant to have a serious conversation, somebody may just start taking you as a joke because what you're presenting sounds like a joke. This happens in real life as well. If you put forward a crazy scenario, some people may just jump to making a joke about the crazy scenario and stop engaging with you seriously, or they may get the feeling that you don't want to engage seriously, even if you say that you do, because the way that you're engaging, what you're putting forward, is not serious at all, and it seems contrived and silly. So they're just going to treat you as if you're silly, and now you've lost the entire serious tone of the conversation because of the hypothetical that you put forward. This is the most absurdly dishonest interpretation of the question intellectually possible. Not even a straw man. Fucking straw unicorn territory here. Again, upset about the contrived nature of this thing, and then they're going to interpret it as bad faith, right? I agree in that specific scenario, but that doesn't happen, lol. So this person actually engaged with it. Like, yeah, in that specific scenario, that sounds bad, but let me make a practical argument here. That's not practical. That's not what's happening. That's not what anybody is talking about. So even the people who you're looking to have concede on this point, to concede on the principle of it, you don't necessarily make ground with them. Because even if they take it seriously long enough to concede on it and go, well, yeah, that would be fucked up, but, and then the conversation keeps going anyway. So this doesn't even accomplish your goal of shaking people's foundational ideas, really, if they're engaging with you in good faith. Now, there are two replies in here that were hidden that I actually feel like are good. Are you immoral for pressing that button if you're in that house while the burglar is unarmed? So engaging with it. Let me go ahead and change this hypothetical, work with it, and then pose a question back to you. Dario doesn't respond to this person, unfortunately. But like, here's somebody that took him seriously, adjusted it, and continued a conversation based on that hypothetical. Doesn't happen a lot. And they're not popular. These replies were hidden from me. So it's just not likely you get this person. And, you know, this is an example of one of the few people that might take Dario seriously here, and they're not responded to or liked at all, because that is where the most contention is over, not whether booby trapping your own house is moral or not, lol. And then they point out this issue with the booby traps, which again, you get distracted on the cogs of this complicated machine because you've given them more footholds in the conversation to disagree with you over by putting out this contrived scenario that brings more mechanics into it that could be problematic. Is this something that happens a lot? How many burglars are killed each year in this surreal way you've described? Do you think this is a useful analogy? So to be fair to Dario, it's meant to be a philosophical thing to look at the philosophical nuts and bolts of what you would do by creating a crazy scenario to test the edges of that. But I do agree with this person. It doesn't happen a lot. You're not having a practical conversation when you're doing this, which is what most people want when they're talking about something as serious as having someone breaking into your home and having to make the decision about whether or not to threaten their life, right? As you guys have said, if you've never ever been in a situation where you've been mugged, where you've been robbed, where you've had people threaten you, like, you just imagine that the people coming up with this bullshit are people who have never been in those situations. And if you're somebody that has been in those situations, you can't help but like be bad faith to this person, not take them seriously because of the way that they're talking about what is a very serious thing, having gone through it, right? Or if you think the conversation is serious in general, you might be like, well, why are we talking about this? This doesn't happen. I think that liker or hater, Aiko Rules actually points this out, and oftentimes I agree with her. We, in the debate space, go into hypotheticals and contrive scenarios a lot, and they just get so many steps removed from what we're actually talking about that they're not really helpful. They're only helpful in an entertaining way, or in sometimes an intellectually stimulating way. But like, I can see why a lot of people just have problems with it, because it's not practical. You're not having a practical conversation. And in that way, if it's not practical, it may not be a very useful analogy, right? And so those are the responses. That's kind of some of that. Let me see if I have other bits I wanted to talk about, and then I'll go to you guys for some chatting here. I have written here, hypotheticals which stray far from reality set up incredibly niche scenarios or demonstrate a perceived misunderstanding of reality are all too slippery to grab onto. You need to implement practical hypotheticals or make sure the room is ready for a contrived one, which is not the case on Twitter. Some people did engage with him and correct the hypothetical, which takes a lot more brain power, but is how I'd advise you to engage in a situation like that. They get less engagement though, and even Twitter hid them from me. So again, the two last replies that we looked at there. In terms of my thoughts, hypotheticals which stray from reality and set up these scenarios, I don't think they're great. Yeah, and when you do engage with them, what this take does, however, I'm just going to read what I wrote. What this take does do, however, is till the ground for people with different ideas to come out of the woodwork. If you believe your personhood extends to your possessions, believe using lethal force to defend property is defensible, or have a personal thing against burglars and thieves, then you will have an interesting response to even this hypothetical. I think many of those people would trigger those of us that would prefer a world where we don't use lethal force on people, especially for defensive property, which some leftists may not even like the idea of. A lot of leftists don't like the idea of personal property. And so by stirring up those people and having those mice come out of the soil, you're kind of starting a whole new thing where now the terriers have to come in and they have to eat them and whatever. And you're starting a lot more negative discourse because you're doing this, because people respond with a crazier take than they otherwise would have. And then people that have crazy takes that are the crazy opposite of that respond to them. And then it becomes a whole nightmare. So in terms of my advice here, you need to try and make clear that your hypothetical hits upon the variables someone has presented well. You need to do a good job of that. A lot of people here disagreed even that his hypothetical had to do with the initial tweet, though it did have to do with it. You know, it might not feel that way to a lot of people. And so you have to make it clear what parts correspond to what parts, right? And then you have to be open to people correcting it and saying, hey, look, this booby trap thing introduces a new variable that more people might disagree with and is a whole other, you know, topic of conversation. I may not even agree with the idea of having a booby trap in the first place. And just because I'm against the idea of the booby trapping does not mean I'm against the idea of using lethal force against burglars. So, you know, the reason why I disagree with your scenario, or I think it's immoral, may be different than the point that the original lady came up with. And in that way, it isn't parallel to what she's saying. It isn't about what she's saying, because the reason I might have a problem with it is completely different why the reason I have a problem with what she's saying. Because if I have a problem with booby traps, but not with lethal force on burglars, I have a problem with your scenario for a different reason than I have a problem with her scenario, right? So it can cause problems there. If your hypothetical strays from the framework of the original topic, you need to work to explain that diversion. You have to make sure that the company you're in is prepared to understand and engage with your outlandish hypothetical, which you can't do on Twitter, so don't do it on Twitter. Try to consider other options, especially if a common criticism you receive is that you set up outlandish hypotheticals, which I know a lot of you are out there, a lot of you debate bro people out there. I see you, viewers. I see you. You have these problems, and you know that you do. So if people have told you in the past that they don't like you coming up with random bullshit and whatever, and you run into problems with that, here's some advice for you. Number one, can you just reword the original statement? Don't go the 100 steps further to create some crazy hypothetical and whatever. Can you just reword the original statement? Can you work from there? Can you pivot 2 steps away from it? Number two, can you ask a simple question? Is there a question that lies at the heart of the hypothetical you're putting forward? Because if you're bad at putting forward hypotheticals, stop doing that. Stop using it because you're using it incorrectly. Think of another way to do it. If the whole hypothetical is meant to pose a question, ask the question. Can you present your own idea? So if the hypothetical is meant to underscore a way of thinking that you feel differs from what they're putting forward, just explain your way of thinking. Don't use a contrived hypothetical to drive home a point about why you believe what you believe. Just explain what you believe. Oftentimes these hypotheticals are put in lieu of an argument, in lieu of a question, in lieu of, a problem that you're seeing with what the other person is saying. And for that reason, you're not Socrates or whatever. You're not Aristotle. You are not good at this, especially if your friends note to you all the time that you have problems with these hypotheticals and stuff. You're not those philosophers. You do a bad job. Live with it, okay? If you have that problem, stop doing it. Do something else, right? And then finally, if it must be done, consider asking if you can introduce a fringe scenario to test where the belief comes from and the extent of it. If they say no, drop it and reconsider. There are 100 million different ways to communicate individual ideas. There's 100 million different ways to have a conversation. Just have it a different way. Remain flexible. Don't feel married to your hypothetical. A lot of the time with conversational problems I see with people, it's that they're married to a particular way of doing something. Mr. Girl is married to the idea of calling people liars. Mr. Girl is married to the idea of thinking that he knows somebody's internal workings better than they know their internal workings. Some people are married to the idea of, this ideology or that ideology or this belief or that belief. Flexibility solves a lot of recurring problems. If you have recurring problems in conversation, like using extreme hypotheticals all the time, consider being flexible, because flexibility will save you from that problem. It'll enable you to do more things and use more tools that will work better for you.